Welcome back to On the Ball, interview series from the Vanderbilt Sports and Society Initiative. Really excited to have Andrea Williams with us today. Whenever I think about baseball season, Andrea, I think about you, and I love talking baseball with you. But thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So last time I saw you was actually at Hawkins Field. It was a Vanderbilt baseball game, and you were invited to throw out the first pitch. I know there was an announcement about your book on Effa Manley, and you and your family were out there on the field, and you let somebody else throw out the first pitch. But tell us the story, and what that meant to you and your family to be out there.
Yeah, I mean, it was really incredible. Since writing the book, Baseball's Leading Lady, published in January of 2021. That was the hardcover and paperback release this past January of 23. But it's amazing to me. I know what Effa meant for me, just learning about her story as a woman, in sports. Coming out of undergrad, my goal was to work in the front office, was to be ultimately a general manager of a Major League Baseball team. So her story was really it was fascinating, but it was also motivating. It was encouraging for me. But at the same time, the deeper I dug into her story, I understood that there was a lot for people, whether you even like baseball or not, to learn. So, I'm always appreciative. Selling books, as you know, is not always easy. So,
Right.
I remember doing this kind of Zoom thing when the book came out in January, because it was virtual, because we were in the middle of a pandemic. So yeah, anytime, we can shed a light on Effa's story, but then also, talk about this book that everyone should buy, is a really great thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And what struck me too about that day was your kids had a chance to meet Enrique Bradfield, and I think he signed some baseballs for them. It looked like, I don't know what your observations were, but to me, it looked like Enrique sort of understood the moment, and that he was talking to some young Black kids who were excited to meet him. And I felt like your kids really looked up to Enrique. But what was that moment like for your family?
Yeah. So my 11-year-old actually threw out the first pitch for me. He, just by nature of the work that I do, if I'm in, I just did a story on walk-up songs for New York Times for kids. Couldn't put my kid in it, right? Because it's a conflict of interest and all that stuff. So that was an opportunity that he could kind of take part in some of the work I do. But yeah, he um, you know, is really excited about baseball. He'd actually watched, Enrique was a guest on, so my son plays on the Nashville Stars. It's the Nashville Stars Youth Foundation, their 11U team. And one of his coaches, Ro Coleman, has a podcast with some of his Vandy friends, and they had Enrique Bradfield on there. And my son watched it and really, became, really interested in his story. He loves that he steals a lot of bases, and it's just really fun and exciting to watch. So yeah, getting to meet him in person was really cool. He got a baseball signed, and it said, "Your best friend." I was like, does he sign all the balls like that?
Oh, cool. Yeah. I mean, I know when I was a kid,
it was very exciting. Yeah.
if a player on the Milwaukee Brewers had put your best friend, like I would have lost my mind.
Right? Yes,
Yeah.
I know. I wasn't gonna bust the 11-year-old's bubble. I gotta say, listen, I remember to this day, when I worked at Kauffman Stadium, I worked in the Crown Club, and how it works, like, to get to the Crown Club, they're the premium seats behind home field, so you have to like go down underground. That's where the restaurant is where I worked, and you ride the same elevator that the players ride. It's how it was back in the day. I don't know if anything has changed, but you ride the same elevator, because that's also how you access like the clubs, the locker rooms, and all that kind of stuff. And I rode the elevator with Alex Rodriguez. Now I feel like I talk about King Griffey Jr. in every interview I do.
Yeah, right.
This is the obligatory King Griffey Jr. reference, okay?
Okay.
But I was very much a fan of Alex Rodriguez until he took the money and ran to the Rangers, but we won't get into that. I rode the elevator with him, and he told me I had pretty eyes, Andrew. And think I told that story. I was probably a junior in high school. I think I probably told that story for like 10 years. So if my son thinks Enrique is his best friend, who am I to say that he's not? Like, we can drive this thing till the wheels fall off. I'm not mad at it.
That's right. Oh man, that's just the beauty of sports when you're a kid, and
Yes,
having those heroes
100%.
and feeling the connection to them. Man, it doesn't get any better than that. So I wanted to ask you later in the interview, but I'll ask you now since you mentioned the Nashville Stars team that you mentioned
Yeah.
and the youth development program they have and what Ro Coleman's trying to get accomplished. For those who aren't familiar with that, can you just, share what that program is all about?
Yeah, Ro grew up in Chicago, and as a Black guy that played this sport, and played it for a while, won a College World Series with Vanderbilt, played in the minors, understands that we've got to do more work to change what the sport looks like. The sport that was once America's pastime and has really excluded certain segments of the population. So also understanding too that when we talk about, oh man, why when we look at Major League Baseball, why is Black American participation at 5 or 6%, akin to the 50s, before every team had even one player, one Black player. That work really starts, at the ground level. You can't just like pluck, college kids or 20-year-olds, out and say, come join this Major League Baseball roster, right? They have to be ready, they have to be trained, they have to develop. And so he is doing that work, along with his other coaches, Jared Parker and DJ Merriweather, who is Nashville born and raised, and was really doing this work, going into the community, developing and training kids, even before he met Ro. So yeah, it's fun to be around a program that really is doing the work to try to make baseball accessible and fun for everybody. People ask me, what is the problem here? Why aren't more kids playing? There's so many layers to that onion. But at the end of the day, Black kids have to feel like they can show up, get the training and development, in a safe and welcoming and inclusive space, and learn how to play so that they can ultimately fall in love with it. And yeah, I think they're working to do that.
I know you wrote a story about that for the New York Times maybe a year ago as well. And
I did.
yeah,
My
do you
son
feel
was not on the team at that point, though.
okay? All right, yeah, no conflict of interest there.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
do you feel like what's happening here in Nashville is, illustrates piece of a larger trend? Is this happening other places, or is this really like a rare thing that's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I certainly there are, if we look at, people keep calling attention to, as they should, last year's MLB draft, and the number of Black American players who were drafted, really high in the draft, top 5. And that's really important. Atlanta, there were a couple guys, Tamar Johnson and Drew Jones, that came out of Atlanta, and it's a really fertile breeding ground right now for black kids, Black players in particular. There's still so much work to be done, though. There's still a ton of work to be done. What I don't want to do when we talk about the work that the Stars are doing, or talk about, what's happening in Atlanta, when we talk about what the draft looked like last year, is to say, oh man, yeah, we fixed it, or even that we're close to fixing it, because we're so very, very, far away. You can show up at any tournament, on the weekend, perfect game 7, it's going to be 98, 99% white. That's
Mhm.
just what it is. So, I think the pointing out the anomalies or the exceptions are important, because it shows that it can be done and that people are doing the work, because we don't want to ignore or diminish the work that is being done. But we cannot at all suggest that, a kid in, Indianapolis would have, the same opportunities that a kid, who has access to the Stars has, or that a kid who is in Atlanta has. And please, I don't know what's being done in Indy, so if they are doing the work, then great. But just as a hypothetical,
Right.
because it really is going to be all hands on deck kind of thing. Even going to the Stars, you've got an 11U team and a 14U team. That 11U team has 14 kids on it. So, this is baseball, right? You're not going to keep 30 kids on a team, and they're doing work to make sure that they have some other outlets for kids, that there are some other teams, that there are some developmental teams who maybe, don't play travel ball, don't do the tournaments. But yeah, we need a lot more work here because, every kid that plays youth baseball, what's the percentage? How many are, if we're looking at what the numbers in Major League Baseball are, and we're kind of using that as like our benchmark, our metric for, how the game has changed. And is that a right or wrong way to approach it? I don't know. But if we are, we have to understand that, out of 100 kids that are playing, as 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds, how many will make it? How
Right.
many will get drafted? Not very many, right? So we got to fill up the pipeline at the front end in hopes that, we will get enough on the back to start to change what the major league level looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about the connections. I mean, it's a continuum from youth league all the way to the major leagues.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, work yet to be done, will be Major League Baseball will be celebrating Jackie Robinson Day or Jackie Robinson weekend here soon. And I know at times over the last few years, you'd see teams lining up wearing their number 42 jerseys and maybe no black players on those
Mm-hmm.
teams, so as we look ahead, and this interview will post before, MLB celebrates that weekend, but what do you see as the sort of the state of the game in terms of black participation by players and also just interest by black fans and outreach to black fans? Where does Major League Baseball stand as we look at Jackie Robinson's legacy? Where are things today?
Yeah. Um, it's a hard question, right? Because if I say, yeah, we're where we've been for the past few years and there's still all this work to be done, then ultimately, that may take away again from the work that, certain people are doing. The fact that there are, black players now that are in the league that are, calling attention to the fact that black people play and love this game just like everyone else, that we always have actually. But again, if we think about it from a global perspective, that it's hard to say that okay, things have gotten dramatically better because they haven't yet. And it also means too that there's probably work being done behind the scenes, right? Like we can talk about the stars, the kids on the 14U team for the stars. I know there are some on that team who would ultimately like to play at the highest level. Will they? Of course, that all remains to be seen. But if we knew for sure today that they are going to play in the majors, we're talking 10 years at least,
Right,
right?
right.
So again, we've got it takes a while. The work that is being done behind the scenes, you plant that seed in the ground and you're watering and fertilizing and all this. It takes a while before you see it sprout. So I guess that's my non-answer
Yeah.
answer, that if we
Yeah.
look at it right now, yeah, we're struggling. It's definitely a struggle bus for sure. But I do think that people are working behind the scenes, that things are starting to shift. And hopefully, Major League Baseball is doing enough to welcome those shifts and to encourage it so that we can get even more people involved. Because again, it's got to be an all hands on deck
Mhm.
situation.
It's one of those examples of a big ship turning, right? It takes a long
Yes,
time
it
for it to
takes a
turn.
very, very, very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think any of these rule changes will have an impact just on the way that baseball is perceived as maybe a faster paced game, or valuing players who steal bases now if an intent is to, just to get back to some of that action and not just walks and home runs? Would that have any impact on popularity of playing or watching the game?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I knew you were gonna ask me that, so I was thinking about it. It is definitely, I think, the pitch clock alone, I love baseball. I grew up with baseball. So, I was kind of the mind like, why do you need to change anything? I love baseball. But I'm not mad at the pitch clock, honestly. It's hard for me to find, any argument against that. Do I think that that alone speeding up the game? I do think it is effective in speeding up the game. Do I think that now that the game is faster, that all of a sudden you're going to have, people who didn't watch before or didn't care before all of a sudden pay attention? I don't think so. I think it is all those other layers to the onion, right? It's, do I
Mhm.
feel welcome here? Do I feel like this sport is is a sport that values me as a fan, that values, who I am, from my cultural experience, that is being included in the sport. Do I see people playing it who look like me? All of these different things also contribute to why, maybe Black people are not, and we're speaking specifically about the Black community here. But ultimately, I think those may supersede how quick the game is. If we think about tennis, I don't think that tennis cared whether people perceived it as slow or boring, but all of a sudden when you got Tiger, now Black people care, and now Black people are starting to pay attention, right? I don't think tennis is a different game, and do people think tennis is slow? I don't think so. But I know that there were people who only started watching tennis because of Serena and Venus. So it's just kind of one of those things that I think, again, it's not one thing, it's many things. For the game itself, I know baseball, whether they're concerned, specifically about the Black community, I know there is a push to grab a younger generation. And in that regard, yes, you probably need to speed it up. But yeah, I mean, it's just really difficult to say. I think some of these things, honestly, just understanding, coming from my perspective, as an author, as a journalist, as a historian, and understanding what the game used to be without rule changes, right? Like, we used to steal bases. Like, if you look at, I think the top 20, I think if you look at, stolen base leaders from like Ricky Henderson to like Maury Wills, right? 10-10, like you got 10 white players, all of those players are pre-integration, like all of them. And then you've got 10, I think 9 Black Americans and then 1 Cuban player. But what does that say, right? What does that mean? What does it mean when we've yet to get back to a point, I should say, where the very best Black athletes play baseball? They don't play baseball.
That's one thing I wonder about this, not that enlarging the bases solves the whole problem, but certain type of players' skills were diminished, maybe now that they're more valued, and so you get back to having a player like would a Vince Coleman like sort of fit into what baseball has been the last couple of years? Maybe not, but maybe it would again, and so then you start to see.
But is that enough, right? And also understanding when you've got to grab potential future major leaguers. You cannot grab them at the college level and say, okay, you're this incredible basketball player or incredible football player, let me introduce you to baseball now. It doesn't work like that. So you've got to grab kids really when they're young and introduce them to the game. Ro talks all the time, baseball is a game of reps. It is reps, it is reps, it is reps, it is reps. And my 11-year-old, like he has seen this, firsthand. He, plays quarterback and plays point guard and, is a really athletic kid. But when you show up on the baseball field, it's important. I think it certainly is an advantage, but also it's a game of reps. Like, you just got to work this game. And we've got to get Black kids into that pipeline early so that they can get that work, so they can get that development and training before we ever end up deciding about what sport they're going to ultimately choose. So yes, we can say, okay, the bases are bigger. Again, I don't necessarily think that solves the issue of, interest, or, whether that is going to automatically, bring in a certain type of player. Certainly not when you talk about when those players have to get into the system and really start to play baseball.
One question about interest, watching the World Baseball Classic, like on one hand I was like, this doesn't really mean anything, it's in spring training, even winning it, like that's not gonna be as important to any player as winning the World Series would be. But it was so much fun. Like I felt like the fans were so into it. It was cool to see the different countries and the way they reacted to their players, the pride that the players seemed to have, and being there out there on the field. Apart from our discussion on, Black baseball, but just what were your thoughts on the World Baseball Classic, and what did it potentially represent about what Major League Baseball has been missing. You know, I just felt like there was
Yeah.
such an element of fun and pride and interest in that tournament that somehow has to be taken advantage of for the benefit of Major League Baseball.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it was just a reflection of what we knew to be true, right? That baseball has a cultural problem, right? Like these guys who play on Major League Baseball teams are now playing for their home countries and they're having lots of fun in a way that we don't necessarily see them have fun on a day-to-day basis. And that is, in my opinion, because now they're in a situation, they're on a team where the culture is celebrated, where they can fully live that out. They can
Mm-hmm.
have fun. The game itself is not any different, but it makes a world of difference when you're playing with people, you know, who look like you, who understand you, who let you be your full self. And this does actually go back to what I was saying, you know, the conversation that we're having about Black baseball players and particularly how we fill up that pipeline. Is the culture there even at the youth level? You know, without a stars team, I know the RBI has been there for decades now, and I think is like trying to, you know, do better in
Mm-hmm.
terms of creating you know, spaces for Black kids that, you know, celebrate Black culture. I think that's what it's going to take. And so yeah, when you look at the World Baseball Classic, it's, yes, this is what it looks like when people feel comfortable, not just because they're hitting the ball out of the park or, you know, they've got 10 strikeouts, but it's how does it look when people show up to play the game they love and they're actually having fun.
Yeah, I hope we see a whole lot more of that. No doubt. All right, back to Jackie Robinson Day. You know, I think when we see the games on TV and there's kind of a Cliff Notes version of what Jackie Robinson represents, and your book on Effa Manley really sort of tells the full story of the desegregation of Major League Baseball, and especially, you know, what that meant in terms of the demise of the Negro Leagues. And so, what do you think people need to keep in mind as they're, you know, examining the legacy of Jackie Robinson and seeing the Dodgers celebrate, you know, their role in that? What's the piece of the story that doesn't get talked about as much that we really should be talking about?
Yeah. I think, you know, people should remember that life, you know, is full of it's wins and losses, right? A lot of times, you know, there are trade-offs, there are sacrifices that have to be made. And so when we talk about Jackie Robinson's legacy and the integration of baseball, the losses on that side were the Negro Leagues, but also when we're talking about what baseball looks like today, it is the fact that, you know, there aren't really any Black managers, right? There are no Black general managers, there's no Black ownership. These were things that were traded essentially when we get Jackie Robinson and, you know, the other guys that were signed, you know, around that time. Um, it's important to remember that because, you know, there were people on the other side, Effa Manley included, who fought for, you know, a different outcome, who understood that, you know, the way that integration happened, which was, you know, Branch Rickey coming in, signing Jackie Robinson, signing a handful of other guys as well, including Don Newcomb, who was on Effa's team, Roy Campanella, and not paying for their contracts and essentially relying on the fact that the Black community was pushing for this very specific thing without really any other guidelines around it. We want integration. We believe that integrating baseball will become this sort of trickle down effect, that it will spread out to all of society. And this is our first push. Once we accomplish this, we can accomplish anything. I don't think anybody anticipated that it would take 12 years for every team to get at least one Black player, number one. But certainly outside of, again, you know, those people on the inside of it, those people running teams like Effa, all of the other owners understood that this was going to drastically impact their businesses, but also the opportunities for other Black people in and around the sport. So now it takes until 59 for every team to get at least one Black player. But certainly on the East Coast in the Negro National League, the Negro Leagues are done within a couple years after Jackie joins the Dodgers. Now, if you're a Black player, you don't have an outlet anymore. You don't have anywhere to go. And if you are a Black manager, even though all of a sudden, Branch Rickey shows up at your door and starts stealing your players, because obviously he sees value, right? He sees that your players are good enough and can help his team. He doesn't see value in your skills and your abilities to train those players. Now you're out of jobs. Black, I mean, it's very much akin to the desegregation of public schools, right? We cherry pick a handful of kids and we move them into these all white environments. Ultimately, we close those Black schools, and where do the Black teachers go? Where do the Black principals go? So all of that needs to be kept in mind, because there's always an origin story for everything that is happening in society at large. So when we look at Major League Baseball, we say, okay, well, why does it look like this? Where are the Black people? Well, Black people absolutely ran teams, coached teams, did all of the things. And then at some point that changed. Why did that change? Who was responsible for that change? And are we discussing that as we talk about the good side of it, which was the signing of the first Black player in baseball's modern era?
Well, before we go, I wanted to highlight the great collection of books you have above you at the top of your bookshelf back there.
Hold on 1 second, because I was like, when we got on, I didn't realize my bookcases looked this bad, but I will just say, we read our books in this house. Yeah. Kids don't always put them back right, so we've got like books falling down. Yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't even notice that part, but a bookshelf that looks used is probably the best type of bookshelf. But on top, you have Kadir Nelson and the Undefeated. I see the story of the Black football player at Harvard, I think it was, right? Yep. The Schomburg Library, and is it Ada Twist Scientist maybe up there too? So
I don't have Ada Twist. I have Hair Love up there. I have, now I'm gonna turn around, Crown. I don't want to mess the title up. Memphis Martin in the Mountaintop.
Okay, that's what that one is.
Ernie Barnes. Yeah, Ernie Barnes, Between the Lines. We don't talk enough about him at all.
Right.
He did the Sugar Shack painting, but was an NFL player. Love his story.
So I just wanted to say, in some ways, I think one similarity that we have is we write for kids and adults, and yes. I wanted to ask you, like, why is it important for you to tell these types of stories for young people? And how do you think about the importance of what you do in this environment today, where there's so many challenges to books about that deal honestly with race or racism? I'm sure you feel like it's all the more important to tell these stories.
Yeah, I just, from a selfish perspective, I wish that I had baseball's leading lady when I was young. When I knew, I played softball, I think right around the start of high school, knew that I didn't really want to keep playing, that I was more interested in, the business side of things. You hear about stadium finance deals, like what the heck does that mean? Player contracts and negotiations. I remember when, Alex Rodriguez signed that deal with the Rangers for, was it $252 million or something like that? And it was at that time the highest contract that had ever been signed. All of that was just so fascinating to me. But I didn't know, I didn't know anybody who looked like me, who had walked that path. Even as I went to college and, started doing some research and, heard about women like Kim Ng, who was an assistant with the Yankees when I was assistant GM with the Yankees when I was an undergrad. Effa's story just completely changed everything for me. And had I had it at, 12, 13, which is the age range that I wrote this book for, I don't know that it would have changed, my career aspirations, but certainly it would have given me some more fuel. And of course, I ultimately later ended up, switching altogether, and I now write full time. But, I think it's important that kids understand the world, as it is, and not just how adults tend to present it to them. I think it's important that we know what's possible. I think, for me, one of the other reasons why I wanted to write this book was because for the most part, it takes place in the 30s and 40s. There is some information about, you know, the birth of the Negro Leagues, even going back to the birth of baseball in this country, really. And, you know, players like Moses Fleetwood Walker, who played in the 1880s. But really, the crux of it is the 30s and 40s. And we don't talk about Black people in the 30s and 40s. It's like Black people were slaves, and then they were getting hosed down in the civil rights movement. They just kind of disappear in between, right? And so if you're a Black kid and you're looking, you know, you're reading books, you know, whether you're reading your history book or, you know, in your English class, you know, your teacher's giving you, you know, some book that has Black people in it, most of the time it's in one of those two eras. What happens, you know, is this how we see ourselves? So to understand that we were able to build these teams and these leagues, and we were able to do it back then when Jim Crow was very much still alive. Man, what are we capable of now? What can we do now, you know, for Black girls, for any girls really? To know that Effa Manley was able to accomplish this in a time when certainly women were supposed to be seen and not heard, and Black women, whole other story, right? But what she was able to do, you know, the battles that she was able to wage and sometimes win, for sure. Again, it inspires me, you know, even today to get up and to keep doing the work, to keep showing up every day. And I think, again, if we get those lessons really early, I think it can have an incredible impact on our future.
All right. So for people who are interested in, you know, reading your book or following your writing on contemporary issues in baseball or country music, you know, like, where can people find you?
Oh gosh, I am barely on Twitter these days.
Okay.
I am protecting my mental health,
Good.
but I do post there when I publish something. I will post this interview once it is live. But I am on Twitter at Andrea Wilwright. I am on Instagram at Andrea Wilwright. Have not posted there. And yeah,
Yeah, and the book available wherever books are
everywhere
sold.
books are sold. I always wanted to be able to say that. My book is available wherever books are sold.
That's right.
Okay. I do think that Parnassus here in Nashville, I've actually got to go sign some of the paperbacks, but I think they did still have a little bit of signed stock left. We Are Family, my book with LeBron James, is there as well. So yeah, wherever you like to buy your books.
All right, terrific. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's always fun to talk to you, and good luck to your Mariners and to your Royals. My Brewers are off to a pretty good start
Okay.
this year, so really enjoying baseball season so far. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's always fun.